So welcome back to Obsidian Dawn Studios, everybody. If you're new here at the studio, we dive into the intricacies of Unreal Engine and game design, covering topics like animation and blueprinting, and recently doing developer videos on projects. In our last few videos, we have been covering designs on our Game Jam project, which is a farm sim game with a looter-style twist. In our previous videos, we went over a crop growing mechanic with timeline animations and a spawner system with a locked gate for our farmland. Today, we will be improving these systems by adding seeds for the player to buy and a market system for players to sell their crops. We will be covering geometries, collision fields, and adding layered widgets with menus for the player to interact with. So without further ado, let's begin. So in our last video, we went over how to create the crop growth mechanic. If I go to start here, I can recap this. We have these plots that we can walk up to. We can hit E to interact to plant a set crop on it, and that crop will then grow through our crop growth mechanic, and then we can hit E again to harvest it once it's fully grown, increasing the amount of crops in our system. You can see here I've created a widget for screen to show us how many of the individual crops we have collected. I collected 1 carrot, walk up to a pumpkin, collect that, increases our pumpkin. This is a widget that I created, very quick, just counts the amount of crops that are on the player, checking the variables that we created for these, and then it just shows us how many we have. But we will use this to showcase what our market system will do. And I can actually show that market system right here. This is just a rudimentary system that I put together. This, obviously, in a full-fledged game, this is going to look quite a bit better. But you can see we created a table with some bowls that the player can walk up to. And if the player walks up to them, they enter a collision field, which brings up a widget, just like with our crop mechanic. If you interact with this collision field, it will bring up a secondary widget, and you can see now, you can see our cursor. The cursor is actually visible because the game is paused, and I have it set so that you can use the cursor to interact with the widget. So, since this is set to carrots, I've got carrots in my inventory, and you can actually hit these buttons to sell off the crop. So hitting the button will sell off the carrot from our inventory. We no longer have a carrot, so it disabled the button, and we can no longer interact with this widget. But we can click this button in the corner, which is our exit button. If you zoom in really close, you can see that actually says exit. I think I'll just turn that into an X so that we can just see what it is instead of a squiggle. By clicking on that, the cursor goes away, we can move again, and if we move to the next one, we can see that it can sell carrots, and sell tomatoes, pumpkins, interact with tomatoes. We don't have any tomatoes, so we can't sell anything. Exit out of that. But in pumpkins, we have a pumpkin, so we can sell it. Click on that, disables the buttons, and that's our market system where we can sell things. So in order to create this market stall, it actually took quite a few different widgets and materials to create, all of which I have sitting in my developer folder here. You can see I've got the crop sell point, which is the blueprint here, with the multiple widgets, or with the one widget and the interact prompt that you can walk up to. But I also have a series of widgets over here called sell crops. And this was the easiest way I found to allow you to sell off individual product. I just created a widget for each product and changed the code accordingly. But each one has the exact same code. The only thing changing is what crop is being targeted in the player character. So if we go over to the third person character, go into blueprints, go into the character itself, we come down here. Oh, by the way, this is the code to add our crop tracker. It's just a create widget, add to viewport. Very simple. This is how I usually do HUD systems for games. And the crop tracker itself just keeps track of these variables here. So these are the variables that we have: the number of carrot, pumpkin, and tomato. We don't need to do anything else with this. There's no other code in here for this, except for the player interact code here. There's no other code involving these. These are just integers, and they are only affected by the cell crops. So if we go back into our content folder, developer, Chris, the first thing that you're going to see is our crop cell point, which is this. If we open that up, you can see it's a series of different code sections. First one that you're going to see is our event begin play. I have this set up on a sequencer because I want things to kick off at the start of creation, and I want it to set the product that you're wanting to sell, and I want to get the references to the player, the widget, set the interact prompt to visibility none, the same way that we did with the crop growth mechanic, and getting the product to sell will set the text for the crop or for the interact prompt. So the first thing that we did exactly the same thing as the crop mechanic. We just went in, got a reference to the interact prompt, user widget object, cast to interact widget, the same thing that we did for the crop, set the widget reference. The second thing that we did was get the player reference, cast to the third person character. You can cast to whatever character you want. Get the player pawn. As long as it's the player character, this will work. Set the player reference. And then in our event graph, after those two are done, it will go into the next thing in the sequence, which is setting the visibility of the interact prompt, which is the widget that we added for the interact widget. So this just makes it so that when you start the game, you don't see the prompt without walking into the collision field first. After that's set, you come down here, and I have a string product to sell variable, which will be set down here in this next part. This goes into an append, which is sell and then a space underneath, and then product to sell. And what this does, it connects two strings together to form, I guess, a sentence. And then we do a to-text string conversion, which takes our string, turns it into a text for the for interact prompt in the widget. So this code right here is what sets the words that you see when you walk into this. So you see you walk into the first one, it says sell carrots, sell tomatoes, sell pumpkins. Sell space is the first part of that. The actual crop is the variable itself. So I'm going to show you how that variable is set. Alright, so after we're done with this and setting the text for the prompt, we can then go into our sequence 3, which I suppose is sequence 4, although this part is not necessary based on the way I designed it. I believe if I disconnect it, it will actually not do anything. I would have to come over here and disconnect this as well. Just connect interact to create user widget. Compile. I think that it still works. We can test real quick. Walk up to it. Oh yeah, it still works. Nothing changes. So it's not necessary, but this was the way that I had it set up before. And what this would do is it would take an enum that we created, which is a series of variables inside of one variable, and it creates a drop-down menu for you to select, which is why I have this set to public variable, so you can see it. You can actually see what I mean by clicking on the item. The enum to sell is a drop-down menu, and what this would do previously, before I set the product to sell as a variable, selecting the item would change the name of what product you were selling and the widget that would be created. That's not necessary anymore because of the way I changed this, but it's a very useful tool if you're looking to create a drop-down menu for you to select individual items on a number of different assets, but you don't want to go in and change the code for the asset for each of those items. This is just a switch for you to change things without changing the code itself. So since this isn't useful, we're going to skip over this. And you saw that I disconnected it from the interact. All this did was say in a print string up in the corner how many of that crop you were selling. Since we will be able to see how many of the crop, we don't need this, but this is another append. You can see I did sell all space, the number of crops into a string, space, that's what the blank is, and then the product to sell. And this would just say sell 1 carrot, sell 5 pumpkins, sell all, yada yada, whatever you needed. This was just a way for the print string to tell you it was working. But since we already know this is working, this is unnecessary. So if we go up into the widget visibility, we can actually see this is the exact same code as the crops that we created the other day. All it is, it checks to see if the player walks into the collision field, which is the interact field, the skinny box that we created. And then if it is the player that walks into it, it sets the visibility of the interact prompt. If they walk out of it, it gets rid of the interact prompt. This is just to keep it from clogging up the screen. In the event of the player interacting with the object, however, it is going to create a widget. The class is the crops to sell widget, which is a public variable, which is why you can see it down here if I were to select this. Crops to sell pumpkin. This widget is the one that we created over here. I've got sell crops carrots, sell crops pumpkin. This is the crops that is being sold off of this widget. If I were to set it to carrots, you would sell off of carrots. So if we go in, create a variable so that we could see it, add to the viewport, then it sets the game to pause. That's why you saw it pause earlier, because this node will pause the game on activation. Set input mode to game only, and set the player controller. This pauses the game and it allows you to set the mouse cursor, show it, so now you can interact with the widget itself. So we can see that in action if we go back over to the widget, activate it, and now we can only select things on the widget itself. You can see it highlights on the button when you move over it. If the buttons themselves were activated, you'd be able to see it highlights on those, but nothing else outside of the screen can be clicked on, only the widget. But after you click the exit, it unpauses and it sets the game mode back. And we will show that when we go into the widget itself. So 4 parts. This is all the code to make the sell point. And you saw how it worked earlier. You can walk up to it. You can sell off individual crops. Now I'm going to show you the widget where you can sell the crops themselves. This is going to be the exact same code for each of the objects that we created. So the pumpkin, the carrot, the tomato, each one's got its own sell crops widget, but each of the widgets is exactly the same code-wise except for what product you're selling. So up here I've got sell crops carrots, and if we go into the designer, this is all it is. You can see I've got a canvas, which is just the player screen. Then I have a border, which is the green. I have that set to an image with a transparency on it. I've got it set to 25% transparency. It's just green because green is good for crops. Connected to the border, I've got a button, which is the exit button. I'm actually going to change what that shows to on the text, I'm going to change that so that it's just X. And we can make that a bit bigger. Make that be 32. There we go. Yeah, that looks good. Compile, save. All right. So as you can see, it's just a button. You come up here to the palette and you can drag these straight onto the canvas. You can put them in whatever object you want, although there is a limit to how many objects can be inside of each other. What I wound up doing here was layering a border on top of a border so that one border had all of the vertical box, all the boxes inside of it, and the secondary border had the text and a box on top of it. And the button inside of the secondary border, I anchored it to the corner so that it is sitting just outside of, it's sitting in the approximate place where you would usually find an exit button. But all of these buttons work exactly the same way. So if I'm going to delete that. So if you click on the button itself, you can come down here to the details panel. And at the bottom here, there's events. So on press, if you hold it down, once you release the button, it does something. Once you hover over it, it does something. But what we wound up doing was just on click. So if we click on that, this is the code that we did for when we click on the button. And this is the code that is exactly the same on every single one of these. The only difference being we change which variable you are getting. So the way that this works, on clicked, when you hit the button either on 1, 5, or 10, it will check if the player has enough of that object. So in the case of the carrot one, because this is the carrot widget, it checks to see if you have 1 carrot on your person. If you do, then since you are selling it, you're going to subtract 1 from the player and set that as the new carrot total. Originally, I had it set up so that if you clicked on it again, it would say not enough crops. This was just a test. It doesn't work anymore, but you can see it disables a button when you don't have enough, so we replace this with something better. And this is the exact same code for 1, 5, and 10. It's the exact same code for carrot, tomato, and pumpkin. The exact same thing all around, just duplicate widgets. On clicking the exit, however, this is a little bit different. You remove the widget from the parent, so the actual selling widget, you remove it off the screen. You also unpause the game, set the input mode to game only for the player controller, and you turn off the mouse cursor, which is why you see it goes back to the regular way that you play the game after you hit the exit button. So this is the code that we are doing for checking the button style. This is what sets the button to whether it is enabled or disabled, depending on if you have enough crops. So for the first button, cell 1, set it to enabled if you have 1 or more of the carrot. Set it to disabled if it is less than that. So this is just a check for each one. If you have more than 1, you can sell 1. If you have more than 5, you can sell 1. If you have more than 10, you can sell 1. And if you don't, it turns off the button. You can't click on it. It's not highlighted. You can't hover over it. It will only check this as being enabled if you have enough of the object in the player's inventory. And it does this every tick, so it is dynamic. It'll keep checking the player. It's not the best for processing, but this works very well. It's a very small amount of code. All this is doing is checking whether the player has the corresponding amount for the button to be activated. And this is the same for each and every one of the widgets that we created. So what you can see, if we go in, and just to speed this up, I'm actually going to go into the player character and set the variable or set the inventory of the player character. Let's do random numbers. Let's do 3 carrots. Compile, save. Let's do 12 pumpkins, because you would, of course, carry 12 pumpkins on your person. Now let's do 7 tomatoes. Compile, save. Play. And you can see our crop tracker actually shows we have 3 carrots, 7 tomatoes, 12 pumpkins. If we pick up the pumpkin, it increases it to 13. Now if we come over to our sell point, if we go into pumpkins, all of the buttons are highlighted because we have more than 10 pumpkins. We can actually sell 5 pumpkins right now. I'm actually going to sell 10 just so we can see it. Drops it down to 3. Sell button 5 and 10 are both turned off now. We can't sell that. But we can sell 3 more pumpkins just by selling 1 at a time. Now we don't have any pumpkins, we can't sell anything. Same thing with tomatoes. We can sell it at 5. Now we can't sell it at 1. Exit. Sell 3 carrots. And now none of the buttons are lit up. We don't have any crops. But if we go over and collect more crops, because it is dynamically set and it checks every tick, it will check to see whether we have crops in our system. And now that we do, we can hit the button again. Alright everybody, that concludes our build for a market stall, where we can walk up to and see a widget to interact with the stall and sell off crops that the player has been collecting. The way that the market stall works is you walk up to it to interact with it, and that creates another widget that pauses the game and creates a menu for the player to sell off their inventory in increments of 1, 5, and 10, and then disconnects the buttons as the player's inventory dwindles. In this video, we wound up going over some basic geometries as well as collision fields, interact prompts, and layered widgets. I also showed off a selling point widget with individual buttons for the player to hit, as well as an exit mechanic for that widget, which unpauses the game and allows them to return to the harvest. In our next video, we're going to be going over how to create a buy station, where the player will be able to collect seeds and use those seeds to plant crops that they will then harvest and sell to get currency to purchase more seeds. If you're interested in seeing how we got the crop mechanic to work, hit the link below to take you to our first video in the series. If you want to see how we created an interactable gate mechanic that checks whether the player has purchased seeds yet, click the secondary link below. If this series interests you and you want to stay up to date, hit the bell to stay notified on future videos, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on videos and upcoming projects. Until next time, remember, go out and make an impact.